It was Christmas Eve, just past 10 p.m., when I first noticed the man standing in my backyard. The snow had been falling in light flurries all day, leaving a soft white blanket across the grass. From where I sat on the couch, sipping hot chocolate and scrolling through my phone, the glow from the backyard light made the scene look almost peaceful. Almost. Because right there, by the tall pine tree near the edge of the property, a figure was standing perfectly still. At first, I thought it might be some kind of holiday prank, maybe one of my friends trying to scare me. But the longer I stared, the less sense it made. The man wasn't moving. He wasn't shivering in the cold. He was just there. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind where people still leave their doors unlocked and neighbors wave to each other every morning. My house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, backing up into woods. So the idea of some random guy in my yard at night didn't just scare me. It felt completely out of place. I leaned forward, squinting through the glass to see better. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with broad shoulders. The dim light from the lamppost cast his face in shadow, but I could make out enough to know he was facing me, facing the window. I felt my stomach twist. I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend. "Dude, there's a man standing in my backyard, not moving." Almost immediately he replied, "LOL, stop trying to freak me out. Merry Christmas, bro." I stared at the message, then glanced back at the window. The man was still there. Same posture, same silence. I put down the mug of cocoa, my hands suddenly clammy. I told myself it had to be a neighbor, maybe someone drunk stumbling around after a holiday party. But deep down I knew this wasn't normal. I pulled the curtain shut, thinking that if I couldn't see him, maybe he couldn't see me. But that only made me feel worse. What if he was walking toward the house right now? I paced the living room for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. Call the police? Call my parents? They were out at a Christmas Eve service and wouldn't be home for another hour. I didn't want to sound like a paranoid kid making things up. Against my better judgment, I pulled the curtain back again. My heart jumped into my throat. He was closer. Not by much, maybe 5 or 6 feet closer to the house, but it was enough. The fresh snow gave him away. A trail of deep footprints led from the tree straight toward my window. I froze, staring at those prints. My mind raced. How had I not heard him move? There was no sound, no crunching of snow. He had just appeared closer. I snapped a blurry photo through the glass and sent it to my friend. "Tell me you see this." It took him a while to respond. When the message came through, my heart sank. "WTF? Who is that?" I didn't know, and I didn't want to. I turned off the living room lights, plunging the house into darkness. Maybe if he thought nobody was home, he'd leave. From my hiding spot behind the curtain, I peeked again. This time he was even closer. He now stood less than 20 feet from the house, his head tilted ever so slightly upward, like he was trying to see me through the glass. The glow from the lamppost caught his face for the first time, and I felt bile rise in my throat. His skin was pale, unnaturally pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wide open, fixed directly on my window. I ducked back, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't just some drunk neighbor. This was something else, something wrong. I thought about calling the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. And what was I supposed to say? There's a guy in my backyard? What if he left before they arrived? What if he decided to come closer while I was on the phone? I forced myself to take another look. He was closer again. 10 feet now. That was impossible. I had just looked away for seconds. How could he move that fast without making a sound? The footprints in the snow were clearer now, pressed deep and leading straight to my window. But here's the thing. The footprints stopped about 10 feet away. No more prints after that. Yet he was still standing there. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I didn't want to look anymore. I didn't want to see what he did next. The floor creaked behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The house was empty. It had to be. But I could have sworn I heard something upstairs. A soft creak, like a footstep. I held my breath, straining to listen. Nothing, just silence. Slowly, I turned back toward the window. My stomach dropped. He was gone. The spot where he had been standing was empty now. The snow glistening under the lamppost. No man, no shadow, nothing. But the footprints were still there, leading up to the window, stopping just a few feet away. I wanted to believe he had walked back into the woods, but that didn't explain the lack of returning prints. He had come closer and closer, and then just vanished. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and dialed my parents, whispering into the receiver. "Please come home. Please come home now." And as I said it, I felt it again. That same heavy sensation. The undeniable feeling that someone was still watching me. I don't remember how long I stood frozen in that living room, clutching my phone like it was some kind of weapon. Every second felt stretched, distorted, like time itself was holding its breath. My parents promised they'd be home in 20 minutes, but 20 minutes suddenly felt like a lifetime. I finally forced myself to check the front door. Locked. The back door, also locked. I tested each latch twice, then 3 times, because I didn't trust myself to notice if something was wrong. But the strangest part wasn't what I found inside. It was what I didn't find outside. The footprints leading up to the window were still there, pressed deep into the snow. But there weren't any new ones. No trail back to the tree, no trail leaving the yard. Just gone. I drew the curtains tight and turned on every light in the house. Brightness filled the rooms, but it didn't make me feel safe. It only made me more aware of the dark windows, black squares against the night, mirrors of glass where anything could be staring in. I kept pacing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe he had really left. But every time the house settled, when the heater clicked on, when the pipes creaked, I felt my body jolt with panic. At one point I heard the faintest sound, a tap. I froze mid-step, my ears strained. Another tap. I spun toward the kitchen window. The curtain was shut, but I swore I saw the faintest ripple in the fabric, as if someone had brushed against it from the outside. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no." I crept forward, each step slower than the last. My heart hammered so loud I was afraid it would give me away. With a trembling hand, I pulled the curtain back just an inch. Nothing. Just the empty backyard, glowing faintly under the lamppost. But then, I looked down. In the snow, directly beneath the kitchen window, were fresh footprints. I stumbled backward so fast I knocked a glass off the counter. It shattered across the tile, the sound echoing through the house like an explosion. I barely noticed. My eyes stayed glued to those prints outside. They hadn't been there before. I was sure of it, which meant he had been right there, right under the window. I scrambled for my phone and finally dialed 911. My voice shook as I whispered, "There's someone in my yard. Please, you have to send someone." The dispatcher kept me calm, her voice steady as she asked for my address. She told me to stay on the line, to stay where I was, to lock myself in a room if I could. I bolted upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. The moment I sat down on the floor, clutching the phone, I made the mistake of looking toward my window. At first, I thought the glass was just reflecting the glow from my lamp. But then I realized, no, it wasn't a reflection. A pale face was pressed against the glass. My scream caught in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The man's eyes were wide and unblinking. His skin stretched thin and gray, his lips curled in the faintest smile. He didn't move. He didn't fog the glass with his breath. He just watched. "Ma'am, are you safe?" the dispatcher asked through the phone. I couldn't answer. My whole body locked up, my fingers gripping the phone so tightly it felt like it might snap. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. The glass was empty again. No face, no figure, just the night outside. But I knew he had been there. The faint smear on the window told me so, a streak left by skin pressed too close. Minutes crawled by like hours until finally, red and blue lights flashed outside. The police arrived, their voices booming through the yard. I ran downstairs to let them in, my hands trembling so badly I could barely unlock the door. 2 officers swept through the house while another searched the yard. When they came back, they looked uneasy. "There are footprints," one of them said. "They lead up to the house, but that's it. No trail away. It's like whoever was here just vanished." I told them about the face at the window. They exchanged a look I didn't like. One of them finally said, "We'll patrol the area, but lock your doors, okay? Stay inside. If anything else happens, call us immediately." And then they left. I was alone again. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and exhaustion. My parents eventually came home to find me sitting on the couch, every light in the house blazing. I told them what happened, showed them the photos of the footprints. My mom hugged me, whispering that I must have just imagined it. That fear had made me see things. But I know what I saw. I saw the man. I saw his eyes staring straight into mine. And here is the part that keeps me awake at night. The police never found any other footprints in the snow. Not in the woods. Not down the street. Not anywhere. The only prints they found were the ones leading to my window. And every time it snows now, I find myself looking out into the yard, waiting, terrified I'll see them again. Because deep down, I know he's not gone. He's waiting. When I first moved into the city, I thought I had landed the perfect apartment. It wasn't fancy, but for someone fresh out of college, it was more than enough. 1 bedroom, decent kitchen, a little balcony, and a big window in the living room that overlooked the street. The building was old, creaky pipes, thin walls, and an elevator that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. But it had character. The rent was low, the location was decent, and I liked the independence. At first, I loved that living room window. It let in the sunlight during the day, and at night I could watch the glow of the street lamps and the occasional passerby below. Sometimes, when the insomnia hit, I'd sit by the glass with a cup of coffee and just stare out, watching the city hum beneath me. But after a few months, the window stopped being a comfort. It started small, a shape in the corner of my eye, a flash of movement outside the glass. I'd turn, expecting to see a person walking past on the street, but the sidewalk would be empty. At first, I brushed it off. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. It wasn't possible for anyone to be outside my window. Besides, I told myself it was probably just the reflection of a car passing or the flicker of a light. But the longer I lived there, the harder it became to explain. One night, I woke around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water. As I walked into the living room, I froze. There was a handprint on the glass. Not on the inside, on the outside. I stood there staring, my throat dry, my skin prickling. The handprint was faint, but clear enough to make out the long fingers, the smudge of a palm. I ran to the balcony to check if someone had been climbing, but there was no way. No ledges, no fire escape, nothing. Just the sheer brick wall dropping 3 stories down to the pavement. I scrubbed the glass clean and tried to put it out of my mind. Maybe the mark had been there earlier, and I'd just noticed it. Maybe it was nothing. But then came the knocking. The first time, it was subtle. A single tap on the window while I was watching TV. I muted the sound, heart hammering. But when I stared at the glass, nothing was there. A week later, it happened again. Tap, tap. This time, more insistent. I rushed over and yanked the curtains shut, but I didn't sleep that night. Soon, the knocking wasn't the only thing. I started waking up to find the curtains drawn back. I always closed them before bed, always. But I'd open my eyes at 3 or 4 a.m., and the curtains would be wide open, the black square of the window staring back at me. Sometimes I swore I could see the faintest outline of a face in the reflection. Not clearly, not enough to describe, just the impression of someone watching. It escalated one night in November. I was having a late dinner when I heard the tap, tap, tap again. Only this time, it didn't stop. It grew louder, faster. A frantic knocking against the glass that made my stomach drop. I turned slowly toward the window. And that's when I saw it. A face, pressed against the glass. The features were blurred by the reflection of the street light, but I could make out pale skin, hollow eyes, and a mouth that twitched into a crooked grin. Whoever it was, they were right there, on the other side of the window, staring straight into my apartment. I dropped my fork and stumbled back so hard I tripped over a chair. By the time I scrambled to my feet, the face was gone. I ran to the balcony, desperate for some kind of explanation, but the street below was empty. No footsteps, no ladder, no sign of anyone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the lights on, staring at the window, waiting for something to move. The next morning I called the landlord. He laughed when I told him, said maybe it was kids messing around, maybe my imagination. Happens in old buildings, he said. You hear things, you see things, don't worry about it. But I couldn't shake it. Every night after, I lived in dread of the window. I stopped opening the curtains completely. I taped them shut so they wouldn't accidentally move. I even put my couch in front of the glass like a barricade, but the knocking didn't stop. I'd hear it at night, soft, patient. A reminder that whoever or whatever was out there hadn't gone away. And the scariest part? Sometimes, when I was lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, I could hear it faintly. Not knocking this time, just the sound of someone breathing against the glass, as if waiting for me to come look. After that first direct sighting, I changed the way I lived in my apartment. I avoided the living room at night. I stopped sitting by the window altogether. Instead of coffee in the evenings, I drowned myself in work or scrolled endlessly on my phone until I passed out from exhaustion. But fear doesn't care about routine. Fear finds you where you are. One night, I woke to a sound so faint I thought it was part of a dream. A soft squeak, like skin dragging across glass. My heart jumped awake before the rest of me did, and I sat up, pulse hammering in my throat. It was coming from the living room. I forced myself out of bed and crept to the door. I didn't even want to look, but something in me, curiosity or survival instinct, pushed me forward. The curtains I'd taped shut were moving. Not fluttering, not falling loose. Moving. As if someone outside was brushing their hand along them from the other side of the glass. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even scream. I just stood there frozen as the squeaking sound grew louder, circling the edge of the window. Finally, I found enough strength to shout, "Leave me alone!" The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It pressed down on me, making my ears ring. And then, clear as day, I heard it. A whisper, right outside the glass. "Let me in." I ran to my bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved my dresser in front of it. I spent the rest of the night curled up in bed, hands over my ears, praying the whisper wouldn't return. By morning, everything looked normal. The curtains were still taped, the glass clean, the balcony untouched. For a moment, I wondered if maybe I really was losing my mind. But then I checked my phone. I had a new message from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. A photo taken from inside my living room. It showed me asleep on the couch the night before, the curtains wide open. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. I hadn't slept on the couch in weeks, and the curtains had been taped shut. I had checked them myself. That day, I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend across town. I didn't tell him the truth. I just said I needed a change of scenery. But deep down, I knew I was running. For a few nights, I slept better. No knocking, no whispers, no photos. I started to convince myself that leaving the apartment had broken whatever curse or stalker situation I'd been caught in. But then, it followed me. The third night at my friend's place, I woke up around 3 a.m. Something felt wrong. The room was too quiet, too heavy. I rolled over and froze. The curtains were open, and there it was. The same pale face pressed against the glass of my friend's bedroom window, staring right at me with those hollow eyes. I screamed so loud my friend came running, but by the time he flipped the light on, the window was empty. He didn't see it. He didn't hear the whisper. He just stared at me like I was crazy. I wanted to argue, but what could I say? That I had proof? I didn't. The photo on my phone had disappeared. Just gone, like it had never existed. Still, I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't done with me. The last straw came one night in December. I had barricaded the window completely, moved furniture, nailed boards across the frame, sealed it with heavy curtains. I thought if I couldn't see it, maybe it couldn't get to me. But sometime after midnight, I woke to a loud crack. The boards were splintering. Something was pounding against the glass from the outside, harder than ever before. The whole wall shook with the force of it. My barricade rattled like it would come apart any second. I pressed myself against the far wall, heart exploding in my chest as the pounding grew more violent. Then, silence. Dead silence. I thought it was over, until I realized I could still hear it, breathing, not outside, inside the room. I turned slowly, dreading what I would see. And there it was. The face. Not outside the glass this time. Inside. In the corner of the living room, pale and grinning, its hollow eyes locked on me. That's when everything went black. I woke the next morning on the floor, daylight streaming through the cracks in the boards. The room was empty. No sign of anyone. No broken locks. No open doors. I don't know if I fainted or if something else happened. All I know is the face never came back after that night. But sometimes when I walk past a window, any window, I still catch the faintest reflection, a pale shape, hollow eyes, waiting. And I know it's not gone. It's just waiting for me to let my guard down. I grew up in a rural town where fields stretched on forever, and the nearest neighbor could be a mile away. At night, those fields were endless oceans of black, and I hated looking out my bedroom window because the darkness always seemed too alive. One summer evening when I was 16, I was up late playing video games. Around 2 a.m., I took a break, stretched, and wandered over to the window. It overlooked the back acres of our property, a flat field that ended in a line of thick trees. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a scarecrow, a tall figure standing in the middle of the field, completely still, with its head tilted slightly to the side. But we didn't own a scarecrow, and something about the way it was positioned didn't look right. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and leaned closer to the glass. It was a man. He was just standing there, staring straight at my house. For a few seconds, I tried to convince myself it was just some drunk who had wandered onto our property. But he didn't move, didn't stumble, didn't sway. He just stood there. I backed away from the window, my skin crawling, but curiosity made me peek again. This time, he had moved closer. Not much, maybe a dozen steps, but enough to make my stomach drop. He was definitely facing my room. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the pale oval of his head and what looked like dark clothing that hung loosely on his frame. I closed the curtains, shut off the lights, and crawled into bed. I pulled the covers over my head like I was 5 years old again, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself I'd imagined it, that when I checked in the morning, the field would be empty. But I didn't sleep a second that night. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to the window and yanked open the curtains. The field was empty. No footprints, no man, nothing. For the rest of the day, I tried to shake it off, but something deep down told me I hadn't imagined it. The next night, I stayed up again, almost daring myself to look out the window. Around the same time, 2 a.m., I pulled the curtain back just a sliver, and my stomach flipped. He was back. Same spot as before, but closer this time. Maybe halfway across the field. I froze, my breath fogging the glass, and for a split second I thought I saw his head twitch, like he knew I was watching. I dropped the curtain immediately. That night I didn't sleep either. By the third night I was a mess of nerves. My parents noticed I wasn't eating much, that I looked pale, but I didn't dare tell them what I'd seen. I knew they wouldn't believe me. But still I couldn't stop myself from looking. At 2 a.m. sharp, I pulled the curtain back again. This time, he was at the edge of the yard, so close I could make out more detail now. His clothes were ragged and torn, hanging loosely off his frame. His head was bald and oddly smooth, and even from that distance I could feel his eyes on me. I yanked the curtains shut, locked my window, and sat back in bed, my chest tightening with panic. That's when I heard it. A faint crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of footsteps in dry grass. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but then the footsteps stopped. Silence. I sat there frozen, my thumb hovering over the call button, until eventually exhaustion won, and I passed out. The next morning, I forced myself outside. I told myself I had to see proof, footprints, trampled grass, something. But when I walked out into the yard, the field looked untouched. No signs anyone had been there. By now, I felt like I was losing my mind. But the worst was yet to come. A few nights later, I woke up not because I was checking the field, but because something felt wrong, like I was being watched. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. The curtains were open. I never left them open. And standing right outside the glass, just inches from me, was the man. His face was pressed against the window, pale and expressionless, his eyes locked on mine. His breath fogged the glass as he stared without blinking. I screamed so loud my parents came running. By the time they burst into my room and flipped on the lights, the window was empty. But they saw it too this time. The fog on the glass. The faint smudge where his face had been. My dad ran outside with a baseball bat, circling the house, but there was nothing. No footprints, no intruder. After that night, my parents moved me into a different bedroom, one without a view of the field. They thought that would fix it, but it didn't, because the man followed me. And the next time I saw him, it wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. After that night, my parents did everything they could to convince me it was over. They nailed shut the old window in my room, moved me down the hall, and even set up motion lights outside. For a while, it seemed to work. The lights never went off. The field stayed empty, and my parents thought I was finally calming down. But I wasn't calm. I couldn't forget that last look. The way the man's face had pressed against the glass. So close I could see the pores on his skin. The way his eyes never blinked. You don't just forget something like that. Weeks passed, and nothing happened. But that didn't mean I slept peacefully. Every night I lay awake, waiting, listening. My new room faced the front yard instead of the back fields, and I thought that would help. But it only made me wonder, if he wasn't in the back anymore, where was he? The answer came one night in the middle of winter. I woke up to the sound of creaking floorboards. At first, I thought it was my dad, up for a glass of water. But the sound was too deliberate, too slow, like someone trying not to be heard. My body went ice cold. The footsteps weren't coming from the kitchen. They were coming from inside the hallway, just outside my bedroom door. I sat frozen. My breath caught in my throat as the floor creaked closer. Step by step. Then, silence. I stared at the crack under my door, waiting to see a shadow pass, but nothing moved. And then, tap, tap, tap. A knock. 3 slow knocks on my door. I wanted to scream for my parents, but the sound died in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Who's there?" I finally croaked. No answer, just silence. I pulled the covers over my head, shaking so badly I thought the bed might rattle apart. After what felt like forever, I must have blacked out, because the next thing I remember is sunlight pouring into the room. When I told my parents, they searched the house top to bottom. Every door was locked, every window sealed. There was no sign of anyone breaking in. But I knew what I'd heard. That night I begged to sleep in their room. My mom agreed, probably because she was starting to believe me. But my dad still thought it was stress or some kind of sleep paralysis. So I slept on their floor. And for a while, things went quiet again. Until one night, around 3 a.m., I woke up for no reason. The house was completely silent. My parents were asleep in their bed, breathing steady. But I felt it again, that heavy, suffocating feeling of being watched. Slowly, I lifted my head and glanced toward the hallway, and my blood froze. He was standing there, the man from the field. Standing in the doorway of my parents' room, his pale head tilted, his torn clothes hanging off his frame. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. My voice was gone. Then, as if sensing my terror, he raised one finger and pressed it to his lips. Shh. And just like that, he was gone. No sound, no footsteps, just empty air where he had been. I thought maybe I had dreamed it. But when the sun came up, there was proof. On the carpet where he had stood, the fibers were crushed, as if someone had been standing there all night. From then on, it didn't matter where I slept. My room, the living room, even at a relative's house, he always found me. Sometimes outside the window, sometimes at the foot of my bed, sometimes just around the corner, waiting. He never spoke. He never touched me. He just watched. But each time he seemed closer. The last time I saw him was the night before we finally moved. Boxes were stacked everywhere, and I had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the familiar feeling of being watched. I sat up slowly, scanning the room. And there he was, not outside, not in the doorway, sitting in the armchair across from me, his pale face grinning, his hollow eyes locked on mine. I was too scared to move, too scared to scream. I just sat there, paralyzed, as he slowly leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees like he was settling in to watch me all night. And then, the strangest thing happened. I blinked, and he was gone. The chair was empty, but the cushions were still indented. We moved out the next morning. I never saw him again after that. But even now, years later, I can't sit near a window at night. I can't sleep with my door cracked open. And I can't look too long at empty chairs in dark rooms, because deep down, I know he's still out there, waiting, watching. And one day, he might decide he doesn't just want to watch anymore.